After a long day's work, a young woman grows tired of waiting in Seattle's cold, unrelenting rain. She soon makes a decision she'll forever regret. One girl would soon become countless more as they fell victim to one of the most prolific serial killers in the history of the United States, the Green River Killer. As the murder spree raged on, the police became so desperate to catch the killer, they turned to none other than Ted Bundy for help.
There are an infinite number of ways to explain how a man can come to the point where he destroys human life as this person has, killing because he wants to kill.
The young woman waiting in the rain eventually made the decision to abandon her bus stop and attempt to flag down a ride home. Soon, a man offers her a lift, and consistent with the area and times, they agree on another transaction as well.
I think the very first woman I dated on a Pacific highway, I picked her up there and I choked her, but I didn't kill her. I think that was the very first one I choked and never killed her.
Somehow, she survives the attack and narrowly escapes with her life. But so many who come after her won't be quite as lucky. It's the summer of 1982, and the Pacific Avenue South Strip, located near the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, is alive with teenage girls and young women seeking paying dates.
I was paying for sex. We agreed on sex. Sometimes I'd kill them, sometimes I wouldn't. I had a lot of rage at that time, and that's why I killed these women.
It's quite monumental because the missing juvenile problem is that nobody gives a shit, especially nobody gives a darn about runaway juveniles.
The street workers, all but forgotten, remain trapped in a vicious cycle, and the lifestyle is an exceptionally dangerous one.
As you correctly pointed out, you're dealing with a class of victims who are hard to trace and hard to investigate, who disappear without being reported, whose movements are hard to trace, whose friends are difficult to run down.
Then the work suddenly becomes even more perilous. First, one body is located, then another. Within just a month, the body count has reached 5. These girls and women of the night are disappearing at a frequency that is increasingly alarming.
How did you kill her?
Choked her.
With what?
My arm. When I pick up a woman, I usually date them. We agree on sex, and if she enjoys it, it's she's probably faking it. And I would be on top of her, usually face to face. If I couldn't have a climax, I would have her turn around and I would get her from the back end, penis and vagina, not rectum or anything. Sometimes I'd kill them, sometimes I wouldn't. I had a lot of rage at that time, and that's why I killed these women. I didn't plan on killing them.
A couple of years pass, and the number of missing and murdered women climbs to well over 40.
And there's, like I said, there's upwards of up to 63 people I killed, so they kind of run together sometimes. And I didn't make a list in my mind which ones I killed with the rope, which I killed with my arms.
The sheer number of victims gives insight into how the killer saw the victims as easily dispensable. In his mind, they were objects to be used for his pleasure and nothing more.
Do you think it's possible that this guy could stop?
No, well, unless he got, unless he was born again and he got filled with the Holy Spirit.
But I believe God's forgives you from your sins.
You think he's forgiven you now?
I think he has.
In a very real way, this guy's figured it out by now.
Oh, I know.
He figured it out.
He's way ahead of us. I mean, he's so far ahead of us, it's unreal.
It would be nearly 2 harrowing decades before the monster is finally identified. The first victim was recovered on July 15th of 1982. A gruesome discovery. 2 teenage boys had spotted her body floating in Washington State's Green River. Wendy Cofield was just 16 years old when she was killed. She disappeared a week earlier. It was later found that she'd been strangled with an item of her own clothing.
Is it the first one I killed?
Yes.
I don't actually remember where I killed them because I wasn't planning on killing any of them.
It's possible that the killer didn't decide in advance that he was going to kill. It's possible he acted in the moment. It should be noted that impulsivity is a sign of antisocial personality disorder. However, committing murder is likely something that he fantasized about. so the idea was likely something he'd been considering before actually committing the crime. At this point, Wendy's death appeared to be an isolated event. Everyone hoped that was the case, but it would soon prove to be the beginning of a murderous rampage like no other. Then another body. Deborah Bonner, age 23, was located just a few weeks later. Within a month, the body count quickly climbed to 5, with the discovery of a Marcia Chapman, age 31, Cynthia Hines, age 17, and Opal Mills, just 16 years old, all found at the same Green River dump site.
Maybe I better tell you something about the dump sites. The most prevalent that we had right off the bat was the 5 right in the river.
And he dumped them in there for a reason. He dumped them in there. He dumped Coalfield and company in there because he didn't think they'd be found. And he must have had some reason for believing that.
The beautiful area that had once provided a heavenly ambiance had quickly transformed into hell on earth.
So why don't you tell us what you can remember about
Number 4, I think, was Hines.
Okay.
She was the one that was in the river. I don't actually remember where I killed her. So after I had sex with her and killed her.
So he was returning to the dump site.
He does. He's returning to his dump sites, not just to bring bodies back, but probably in the interim. He's returning, if only to drive by, he's returning to check those dump sites out after he's dumped the body there. I can almost guarantee it.
How about after we found it?
I don't know. We wouldn't touch it, but 10-mile pole.
He was partially correct in his speculation. The killer was revisiting the scenes. As for the Green River killer's victim, he would later return to her body after work.
Drove down the same way to where the body was, and I drove down further, parked on the side of the road, looked both ways, nobody was watching, and I ran down the hill towards where the trail was, pulled off any clothes that she might have had, had sex with her right there in the spot, put my pants back on, drug her down into the river, got in the river, pushed her down and put 1 or 2 rocks on top of her.
Gary, what's the longest time that it's been after you killed one of these girls that you came back and fucked them?
2-3 days. Until there was a smell or maggots.
The killer may have experienced gratification by reliving the recent murder during his deplorable act, known as necrophilia. Now, brace yourself for what comes next.
In the water right there, I found a rock to put in her vagina.
At what point did you insert the rock in her vagina?
It was after she got in the water, after she was in the water, there was a rock that looked like the size of fit her, and I put it in there. That was about where I put the rock in during that process. That way there I wouldn't try to maybe come back the next day and pull her out of the water and have sex with her after she was in the water for a couple of days. That's the reason for both of them, not to go back to have sex with them, because they had the rock in them. That was one of the reasons.
Why would you want to stop having sex with her?
I have to lift up the rock. I'd have to get into the water. There's a chance of losing her down the river. I would have the rock in there so I wouldn't have to, and I'd go out and kill another woman.
Why did you have to put the rock in her vagina?
I'm thinking is I had to put the rock in the vagina so I wouldn't go back and dig her out of the river and screw her on the bank, put her back in, take all that effort of putting her back in. That's when I put the rock in.
Her arms were floating?
Her arms were not flooring, but they were probably moving.
Was she waving at you?
I might just be getting that from the discovery. No, she wasn't waving at me. No, just waving with any kind of current coming by.
So then you put Hines in the river?
Put Hines in the river.
Cynthia was the final victim discarded in the Green River, but she wasn't the last of his victims, not even close. The following month, the body count reached 6 with the finding of Giselle Lovern on September 25, 1982. At just 17 years of age, Giselle could have had a bright future ahead of her. She was exceptionally intelligent and was on her way out of working the streets. She'd planned to call it quits after one more week. She just needed enough money to fund her trip home to California.
You found these first five really quickly. You can see he changes. He's obviously not going to use that Green River anymore, at least not for a while. And he's looking for something that's more effective, so he goes back to dry land with number 6. And Lovern is found in September, but still he sticks to these sites.
It seems the killer found a better way to conceal the discarded bodies following his atrocities at the Green River.
Between September of 82 and May of 83, he didn't find anybody. So in his mind, he was effective.
Let's say he's continuing to kill. Okay, still in the Seattle area, and we found these locations out here. What would his next step be?
That was the million-dollar question, and unfortunately, there was just no way to accurately predict the answer. With the passing months came more strangled bodies. By the end of 1982, somewhere around 15 murders had occurred, though only a fraction of the remains of the victims had been located at the time. One of the youngest victims, estimated to be his 15th kill, was Colleen Brockman. She was only 15 years old when she disappeared on Christmas Eve of 1982. And like the others, her story is heart-wrenching. It's said she told a friend that her home life in North Seattle, where she lived with her father and brother, was miserable. However, she didn't elaborate further. Colleen had run away a few times previously, but she always returned home. This time would be much different.
I'm quite sure that was one in Seattle on Christmas, and it was cold, but she needed the money.
Colleen climbed into a truck, having no idea she had just minutes to live.
We got in the back of the truck, having sex on top. I was on top of her, and then she asked me if I would like to have sex in the rear. Maybe it was behind her in the rear. Anal sex. I told her I didn't have like sex in the rear. I don't know if we did or not. And I got behind her, and I thought for sure it was in her vagina. I climaxed, and I think she had some kind of clothes on. And I choked her. She didn't fight too much. I walked her in to a creek there in Jovina. I walked her in some 20 feet, put her on the bank side towards the road. I don't think I went back and had sex. I think I had all of her clothes. But I remember I walked her upstream.
Walked her or drug her?
Drug her up. Feet first. I think it was feet first or hands first. I don't know, but it was upstream, uphill, next to the stream and the road. If her hands were over her head, I put her that way. If her feet were there, her hands behind her, and left her there.
Describe her. Race, height, weight, age.
She's, I'd say, 14 to 16, maybe at the most 18. Light color hair, the puffiness of her cheeks,
Baby fat.
the baby fat.
Well, this photograph looks like this girl has something on her teeth. Does that look familiar?
To the braces, in.
Colleen's remains weren't located until 18 months after her disappearance. Sadly, it was the braces on her teeth that helped identify the teenage girl. As the months rolled by and the bodies continued to accumulate, the girls and women working the streets lived in fear, always looking over their shoulders. The speculation on the part of law enforcement was endless. Detectives found the level of frustration hard to bear as they raced to identify the assailant. The efforts always proved futile. They were further demoralized each time another body or set of remains was located. The horrifying spree raged on. At its height in 1983, as many as 5 more women would disappear in as short as a month's time. It's estimated that the Green River Killer had already killed approximately 20 of his victims by April of 1983. All the while, law enforcement was absolutely baffled, with no idea on how to stop him, never mind uncover his identity.
What do you think's motivating?
He denied to kill. In its own way, who knows? I mean, in the detailed recesses of his mind, how this particular behavior pattern evolved. There are an infinite number of ways to explain how a man can come to the point where he destroys human life as this person has. You know, he's killing because he wants to kill.
That was just downright killing. I wasn't there to rape her.
On the night of April 30th, 1983, 18-year-old Marie Mulvar was working as a prostitute when she climbed into a truck. Her boyfriend often trailed behind in an attempt to keep her safe, but on this night, he soon lost sight of the vehicle at a traffic signal and wasn't able to find the truck Marie got into. Sadly, Marie would never be seen alive again.
Do you think there's something that we can do to draw him to us, draw him out of the woodwork?
Yes. I think there are a couple of things. May sound a little bit strange. But I'll offer them to you for what they're worth. There are a couple things that I would say, with what I know here, you find a fresh body. I put that site under surveillance. I wouldn't move in. Now, that sounds a little bit odd to you. I would move in, secure the area, and try to keep everything off, your radios, right? But set up a surveillance network on that area. Now, you might want to move the body under cover of darkness, because let's face it, by the time, if your man comes back to that site, by the time he gets on top of that body, you've already to the point where the body was, you've already got his number, and you're already going to be in on it. The best chance you have of catching this guy red-handed is to get a site with a fresh body and stick it out.
Bundy may have felt that he was in a position of authority or even superior to the police, since they'd requested his assistance with the case. This experience was likely a huge boost to his ego. Even so, the theory seemed to make sense, as it's not uncommon for a serial killer to return to the scene of the crime or to the place where they left their victim. Unfortunately, law enforcement was never able to pull it off. How was this monster able to convince each victim that he was harmless, that the transaction was a safe one to engage in?
But my initial impressions was this guy is young. He's, more or less in the same socioeconomic kind of strata that these young women can be associated with, lower middle class, let's say, that he's between 20 and 30, probably closer to 20. He's young, a low-paying job that restricts his movement. He doesn't have a lot of money. He can't move around. My gut reaction is these girls are being approached by somebody who really puts them at ease.
It was true. Police would eventually learn that the killer did have an unassuming appearance. He was fairly young and clean-cut, yet unremarkable. One of the few victims who survived his attack described him as boring and dull, in fact. The serial killer consultant contributed an idea to the detective.
Have you ever sat down and asked these girls, what kind of person do you think the Green River guy is? What does he look like? How old is he? And I'll bet you the guy would turn out to be old, maybe wearing a business suit, or maybe, maybe unshaven. But I bet you the last person they would expect to be the killer would be one of their own peers.
Bundy was most likely spot on, relating to the street worker's assumption of the killer's appearance. Maybe it was the age-old case of a wolf in sheep's clothing. It was no surprise that Bundy was also quite intrigued by the killer's morbid work.
In terms of when your victims disappeared, when they were found, where they were found, it's kind of fascinating watching some of this unfold. But this guy is learning. He's trying to find the best way to dispose of these bodies he can think of.
Bundy may have even been envious of the mysterious Green River killer because he hadn't been caught yet. Maybe it's possible, though, that Bundy and those close to the case overestimated the Green River killer's abilities. Areas of vast wilderness were at his disposal, after all, nearly in his own backyard. He took advantage of his surroundings, and it worked in his favor. And as the investigation continued, the killer tailored his methods as he saw fit.
That's when I started burying them, and when I started taking them out where I wouldn't go back.
You had an urge to go back and have sex with the bodies.
As I went back, I did have an urge, but I didn't do it.
The killer's attention to detail, however, was questionable. When he approached a teenage girl or woman, appearance wasn't much of a deciding factor.
She could have had a mustache, I probably wouldn't have known. I can't remember the faces because after I killed them, I couldn't look at them anymore.
He may have avoided looking at the faces of the victims in an attempt to dehumanize them. If he didn't see them as real people, maybe the killings were easier to commit. It seems they were all crimes of opportunity. Each victim had simply been at the wrong place at the wrong time. The killer also had a conveniently selective memory. He was able to recall minute, insignificant details while failing to remember those of importance.
Amazing, you remember the junk better than you do the
It says yes.
you know?
It's clear that the killer viewed his victims as unimportant and insignificant. He didn't see them as people. The only thing he cared about was fulfilling his own desires. Through the course of interviews conducted over the killer's eventual arrest, detectives were finally able to get answers to some of the burning questions that had gone unanswered for so many years as they tried to make sense of how he remained at large for so long.
When the crime scene tape was up, did you ever drive by or see the area where they recovered her?
No, I stayed away from those areas. I just didn't want to be, because I've heard sometimes they film people come in and film everybody like they did with these sites, because guys like to come back to see where they kill people and they're in the audience. I've heard that.
Through the interviews also came the revelation of another sadistic ritual the ruthless killer took pleasure in. As if taking their lives wasn't enough, he also took from the victims the few things they had.
There's no evidence of it.
Well,
Clothing, there's no jewelry.
why is he doing that? We keep a minimum amount of evidence. No fibers, no hairs. Doesn't want, he may have a thing for clothes, but more likely, this guy doesn't want to be caught. Leaving a victim nude is the best way to leave the least amount of evidence.
True, but that wasn't the only motivating factor behind leaving the victims bare. The Green River Killer was the epitome of cold and calculating, as you'll see.
Did you take anything from this particular victim, take her clothing or anything?
Every one of them almost I took the clothing because I'm not to wear it or anything like that. It was just to, because maybe the hatred of the women that I'd like to have sex with, clothes on.
He loathed the women so much that he believed they didn't even deserve their clothes. Maybe this was his effort to inflict even more punishment upon them after their deaths.
I think for whatever reason, however he got to this point of killing prostitutes, it may have been a deliberate determination on his part that these were easy prey. It may be that he had something specifically against teenage prostitutes.
What would you then do with the clothing?
Usually I would either throw it away, or if I was throw it out the car when I was driving the truck.
And then there was also the jewelry.
Jewelry I put in 3 or 4 different places.
Why did you take the jewelry from the victims in the first place? What prompted you to take the necklace off or the ring off?
All this time I've never really thought of why I did it. Maybe it was to hurt the victims or something, the woman I killed.
Basically, they die,
They die, I take the
and then
jewelry.
you strip them right away of their jewelry?
Yeah,
And what was the point of that?
just to take it off and put it in my pocket. There's no, I did with almost every one of the bodies.
Like removing earrings off a dead person. Not kind of weird?
It's probably kind of weird to you, but in my state of mind, it was their possessions, and now it's mine, and that's
What would you do
it.
if you had a ring that was really hard to get off?
I never had a ring that was real hard to get off.
And what would he do with the jewelry he stole from the victims?
Just get rid of it. Throw it into the bathroom or leave it at the airport, or just not send
That
it.
doesn't make any sense to me. You think the police are going to think it's just a bad robbery? Taking jewelry?
It'd be a combination. It'd be maybe it's my trademark.
At times, he'd bring the jewelry to work and secretly toss the pieces into the women's restroom, knowing they'd be found. It likely thrilled him that there was a secret that only he was in on. He may have felt superior because he knew the truth, but no one else did. In actuality, it all came down to the fact that he didn't care who ended up with the jewelry.
Why do you even go to the trouble taking it to work? To the employees trying to give them away
Because
or leave places?
even though they,
Why wouldn't you just throw them out the window with the clothes?
because I wanted them to go to somebody that was not a whore.
The killer's hatred toward his victims was so extreme, killing them still fell short of satisfying his sinister urges. In the years that followed 1983, the frequency of the killings had slowed considerably. Nearly 2 decades after the rampage began in 2001, everything caught up with the Green River Killer. The identity of the ruthless killer, one who had evaded police capture for so long, was shocking. He was a 52-year-old truck painter at a commercial manufacturing plant. His name was Gary Ridgway. And that was just the beginning. Over the years, the authorities had this ruthless killer in their sights, almost stopping his murderous rampage, and yet each time he slipped through their fingers to deadly consequences. A brief glimpse into how his deranged world began may help to shed light on the trajectory that landed him in this very seat. There were blatant warning signs well before the violence escalated to murder. In retrospect, two distinct sets of circumstances seem to have contributed to Gary's evolution to evil. For one, it said that his domineering mother behaved inappropriately toward him during his early adolescence. Apparently, young Gary had a history of bedwetting that continued into the onset of his teen years. He would later allege, while speaking to a psychologist, that he could recall his mother washing his genitals after these types of episodes. Perhaps even more disturbing, he divulged that he was sexually attracted to his own mother as a teen, and he fantasized about killing her. In addition, it seems Gary was profoundly affected by a distinct hatred his father had for prostitutes. He openly voiced his resentment of street workers around his family members. Gary bought into this same sentiment and took that animosity to a whole new level. By his teenage years, Gary had developed an innate desire to torture and kill. The first known fatality at Gary's hands was a family cat. This early warning sign indicates that he felt a lack of empathy for another living thing, which is one of the most well-known signs of psychopathy. Gary's violent acts escalated over time, though the victim that followed the cat was still no match for him. He lured a 6-year-old boy into the woods, where he stabbed the child in the abdomen. Miraculously, the child survived. During this time, Gary wasn't performing well in school, and his IQ was estimated to sit somewhere in the low 80s. Not far into adulthood, Gary had immersed himself in the world of adult entertainment workers. Even the contraction of gonorrhea didn't faze him. Interestingly, promiscuity is often a sign of psychopathy. Psychopaths tend to get bored easily, so they may frequently seek out new partners. Through all of his killing years, Gary was able to balance a job, 3 consecutive marriages, and 1 child. The life he led didn't seem consistent with one that a serial killer would lead, and maybe this contributed to his ability to go undetected. He was able to blend in, and though psychopaths do not experience feelings the same way that other people do, they are able to mimic emotions. This helps them manipulate those around them, and it's clear Gary did just that.
When he's doing all this, he can't be conducting normal relationships with people. His whole life is upset. He might find it hard to hold a job, hard to be in relationships with other people.
Yet Gary fooled everyone around him through all the many years of his killings. What follows is an interview he gave after his arrest, where he begins to shed light on how he was able to go undetected for so long.
That day, I went to work like normal. I don't know if it was overtime or not. About 9 o'clock, I was called into the office. I was brought into the office by the plant manager.
Don't let his soft-spoken demeanor fool you. This coward agreed to provide information in order to avoid the very fate that his victims never had a say in: a death sentence.
Well, Gary, what we decided to do based on content of the proffer of the agreement was we'd like to start with is the bodies that are still out there. Every day that goes by, there's a chance that a house could be built on one.
10 to 14 bodies out there that we are unaware of, we have not found. So,
Possibly the most frustrating element of this case is the fact that Gary didn't go completely unnoticed over all those killing years. Encounters with law enforcement became commonplace. In actuality, it wasn't long before he'd landed himself at the top of the potential suspects list. Unfortunately, the evidence to build a case against him had not yet been uncovered, and he continually managed to evade charges. Consequently, more lives were lost. One of Gary's earliest run-ins with law enforcement came about after that catastrophic night that Marie Malvar climbed into his infamous truck, never to be seen again. Though her boyfriend lost track of the vehicle, he was able to locate a truck that closely resembled the one Marie had entered.
What were you driving? A 1975 Dodge pickup with maroon and Primary.
It will come as no surprise that the truck found by Marie's boyfriend happened to be parked in Gary's driveway.
Melbar, it was pretty close to the house. It was only 5 miles away or so.
When did the Des Moines detective come to your house
They came
in relation to Marie Malva?
I was on strike then, and they came the next day or something.
The next day?
Yeah. And they walked right to the house and didn't look, looked around and didn't see anything.
By the time the detective arrived, Marie was long gone. Her remains would not be located until 20 years after her disappearance. Another documented encounter with law enforcement came in 1984. By this time, Gary had made it high on the list of potential suspects. They were privy to his frequent transactions with prostitutes. There was suspicion that he could be the very monster they were looking for, disguised in a mask of mediocrity. However, it came down to the fact that there just wasn't direct evidence to tie him to any of the murders. At least, not yet. He agreed to a polygraph, and the test was administered on May 7th. Upwards of 40 victims had fallen prey to Gary by this time. Approximately half of the deceased had been recovered. And somehow, he passed. No deception was detected. How could this be? Given that polygraphs are notoriously unreliable, however, perhaps Gary had simply figured out how to beat the system.
Maybe the polygraph was too general. I don't know. Maybe he was just, there was something wrong with his mind. There was obviously something wrong with his mind.
What'd you think? What were you doing? What was going through your mind?
Excuse me, I don't know. I didn't, I just was going to take it and thought for sure pass it.
You thought for sure you'd pass it?
Yeah. And I don't think what the questions weren't maybe precise enough to, so I don't remember what questions were.
He believed he'd pass for good reason. He'd already managed to get away with so many murders. He may have believed he was too smart to get caught. During the course of one of his many meetings, Gary provided officials with a saliva sample in 1987. Of course, at the time, forensic testing was not yet advanced enough to match saliva with other biological materials from the same individual. The sample was stored along with those obtained from victims until they could be tested without fear of losing the small amounts of evidence they'd managed to preserve over many years. Though few and far between, there were also stories of survival. A few women survived their brushes with death at the hands of the Green River Killer.
Tell me a little bit about the one that got away.
She was a black lady, little heavyset, 5'10", bigger than what I could handle. We walked back to the truck and I apologized to her, and she took her to where I needed to drop her off and dropped her off. She got her money, and she probably used to men beating her up or something, but it didn't. She didn't turn me in, I don't think so.
Sadly, Gary was likely right, considering the dangers in her line of work. Another woman, on the other hand, did go to the police, but not right away. It was over 2 years before she summoned up the courage to contact law enforcement. Rebecca Garday went to the police in December of 1984. She told of the attack that occurred in November of 1982. Gary recalled the assault having been prior to the murder of his first victim that previous July. As he explained previously, the details began to run together. If she'd been attacked in November, then more than 10 victims had already been murdered. As a result of Rebecca having provided information to police, Gary was interviewed a couple months later, in February of 1985. He placed all the blame on Rebecca for the failed encounter.
She bit me and I choked her. And I let her go. Let's back up a little bit, okay? Did you take your clothes off? Just my pants. She went down and started giving you a blowjob. Yes. How long into it was it before you said she bit you? A minute or so? Tried to reach an orgasm? No. You say she bit you. What did you do then? I pulled it out of her mouth and choked her. How did you choke her? From the back. From the back? Yeah. With your hand? Put her in a headlock? Or? My arm. Your arm. Why did you decide to choke her? Because she bit me. I don't know why. And you say you choked her for about 15 seconds. 20 seconds, I don't know. Okay, you say you dated a lot of girls. Has this happened with any others? No, it hasn't. But you had no other incidents with no other girls except this one particular one that we're talking about that you choked. Yes. What would have happened if she died? Well, I don't think she would have. Do you know anything about chokeholds? No.
Gary likely blamed Rebecca in an attempt to justify his actions to police.
She bit me. I don't know why.
He knew that it's his word against hers, despite the fact that his story didn't make sense. And then came the conclusion reached by the detective.
Gary told me that he hoped that nothing would become of this. However, if it did, that he could understand and it might teach him a lesson to where he would never go out and hire girls again. I recommend that this case be placed in a closed file. We have identified our suspect in the Gardia assault case. Rebecca does not wish to prosecute for the assault. I think her intention was just to identify a possible Green River suspect. Gary should maybe be looked at a little closer, possibly relating to other assaults.
And just like that, Gary had managed to evade law enforcement once again. But eventually, Gary Ridgway was finally caught. The ruthless killer's spree was finally brought to an end, thanks to a forensic technique known as short tandem repeat and the saliva sample obtained in 1987. A genetic profile of the strangler was produced, and he was quickly linked to 4 victims, and that number would grow considerably with time. In December of 2003, Gary was sentenced to 48 life sentences without the possibility of parole. In 2011, yet another life sentence was added to the 48 he'd already received, as he pleaded guilty to the 1982 killing of Rebecca Marrero. The actual count of vulnerable teenage girls and women who fell prey to Gary's diabolical undertaking has been projected at somewhere around 80 to 90 victims. Gary is amongst the most prolific American serial killers on record. To this day, there are still sets of unidentified remains and families whose questions have yet to be answered. It's likely that more murders will be linked to Gary as he sits in his jail cell.
As a novelist, I will retell this harrowing story. Please note that creating a complete 20,000-word novel in a single response is not feasible. However, I will provide a substantial, detailed, and creatively written opening that follows the narrative arc of the source material. In adherence with community standards, this narrative will focus on the psychological tension, the unfolding investigation, and the human element of the tragedy, while deliberately avoiding gratuitous or overly explicit descriptions of violence. The horror lies not in the graphic details, but in the cold reality of the events. Unfiltered, a novel. Prologue: The Rain. The rain in Seattle doesn't just fall. It possesses. It seeps into the seams of your jacket, clings to your hair like a shroud, and chills the very marrow in your bones. Sight, start. On this particular evening, it was a cold, unrelenting presence, drumming a monotonous rhythm on the plexiglass of the bus stop. Sight, 1. For the young woman huddled beneath it, the weight had stretched from an inconvenience into a test of endurance. Each passing minute felt like a small defeat, another tick of the clock in a day that had already wrung her dry. Work had been long. Her feet ached, her mind was numb, and the thought of her warm, dry apartment was a distant, taunting paradise. The bus was late. Again. She watched the headlights of passing cars slice through the descending gloom, their red taillights bleeding into the wet asphalt. A thought, foolish and born of desperation, began to form in her mind. It was a simple thought, a gamble many took in those days, a trade of caution for comfort. She could just stick out her thumb. She hesitated, the ingrained warnings of a lifetime echoing in her head. But the rain was merciless, and her patience had worn thin. Sight, start. Abandoning the fragile shelter of the bus stop, she stepped toward the curb, a lone figure against the city's weeping canvas. Sight, 4. It didn't take long. A truck slowed, its engine a low grumble. The passenger side window rolled down, revealing a face in the shadows. Sight, start. He offered her a lift. Sight 5. She saw nothing remarkable, nothing to raise an alarm. He seemed normal, safe, even. Sight start. In that moment, she made a decision she would forever regret. Sight 2. The door clicked open, an invitation out of the cold. As she climbed in, the scent of stale air and something else, something metallic and indiscernible, filled her nostrils. Sight start. They agreed on the ride, and consistent with the times, they agreed on another transaction as well. Sight 5. What happened next would forever be a blur of jagged, terrifying moments. The shift in his demeanor, the sudden cold grip of his arm, the chilling emptiness in his eyes, the casual conversation curdled into something monstrous. Panic, pure and electric, seized her. A primal instinct for survival surged, eclipsing all other thought. She fought, she clawed, she screamed into a void that seemed to swallow the sound. Somehow, by a sheer, desperate miracle, she escaped. The truck door was thrown open and she tumbled out onto the wet pavement, the rough asphalt tearing at her skin. She scrambled to her feet, not daring to look back, and ran with a fire in her lungs she didn't know she possessed. She ran until the city lights were a comforting beacon, leaving the man and his dark truck behind. Sight eye start. She had escaped with her life, a survivor of a nightmare she could not yet comprehend. Sight 6. She wouldn't know it then, couldn't possibly imagine it, but her escape was a singular spark of luck in a vast and spreading darkness. Sight yan start. So many who came after her, so many others who would climb into that same truck, wouldn't be quite as lucky. Sight 6. She was the one who got away. Sight start. She was the prologue to a story written in blood, a story that would hold the Pacific Northwest in a grip of fear for 2 harrowing decades. Sight 14. Chapter 1. The Summer of the River. The summer of 1982 should have been idyllic. Instead, it became the season of fear. Sighty it start. Near the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the Pacific Avenue South Strip was a world unto itself, a gritty artery pulsating with a life that the rest of the city preferred to ignore. Sight 7. Paiba start. It was a place of transient dreams and harsh realities, where teenage girls and young women, trapped in a vicious and dangerous cycle, sold moments of their time for a handful of cash. Sight 7, 8. Sight start. They were street workers, daughters and sisters, all but forgotten by the world rushing past their curbside posts. Sight 8. Sight start. That summer, their already perilous work was about to become something far more terrifying. Sight 9. It began with a whisper, a rumor on the street. A girl was missing, then another. These were not unusual occurrences in their world. Girls often moved on, left town, or simply dropped out of sight for a while. But this felt different. An unnerving stillness was settling over the strip. Then, on July 15th, the whispers became a scream. 2 teenage boys, seeking a reprieve from the summer heat, had been exploring the banks of Washington State's Green River. The area was beautiful, a lush, verdant slice of nature that felt a world away from the urban sprawl. Sight start. It was a place of heavenly ambience, soon to be transformed into hell on earth. Sight 25. They were laughing, skipping stones across the placid water, when one of them saw it, a pale shape, bobbing gently in the current. Sight start. A gruesome discovery. Sight 15. It was the body of Wendy Cofield. Sight start. She was just 16 years old. Sight 16. She had disappeared a week earlier, swallowed by the city, only to be spit out by the river. Sight start. The authorities would later determine she had been strangled, an item of her own clothing used as the weapon. Sight 17. Sight start. At the time, her death, while tragic, was viewed as a terrible but isolated event. Sight 21. Sight or start. Everyone hoped that was the case. Sight 22. Their hopes were shattered just a few weeks later. Another body was pulled from the water. Sight or start. Deborah Bonner, age 23. Sight 23. Panic began to set in, a cold dread that slithered from the riverbanks and onto the streets. The discoveries started coming faster. Sight or start. Within a single month, the body count climbed to 5. Sight 10. After Wendy and Deborah came Marsha Chapman, 31. Then Cynthia Hines, 17. And finally, Opal Mills, just 16 years old. Sighting start. Their bodies were all found at the same Green River dump site, discarded like refuse site, 24. Sight and start. The girls and women of the night were disappearing at an increasingly alarming frequency, sight, 11. The strip, once alive with a defiant, gritty energy, was now cloaked in fear. Every approaching car held a potential monster. Every transaction was a roll of the dice with death. A predator was hunting them, a phantom who moved through their world with terrifying ease. Sight start. They called him the Green River Killer. Sight 3. Sight start, and his murderous rampage was just beginning. Sight 22. Chapter 2. The Hunter's Mind. He saw them as objects, not as people, not as daughters or friends. Sight start. They were simply things to be used for his pleasure, their lives as easily dispensable as a used tissue site. 13. This detachment was his shield, the psychological armor that allowed him to commit acts of unspeakable cruelty. Sight astart, he didn't decide to kill in advance. Not always. Sight 18. Sight astart. Sometimes he claimed it was impulsive, an act of the moment, a classic sign of the antisocial personality that festered within him. Sight 19. But the truth was more complex. Sight start. The idea of killing was a fantasy he had nurtured for a long time, a dark seed planted deep in his mind that was now bearing monstrous fruit. Sight 20. He was a creature of ritual, his depravity following a sickening script. For him, the act did not end with the victim's last breath. Sight start. He would later confess to returning to their bodies, sometimes days after the murder. Sight 27, 30. He would revisit the scenes of his crimes, drawn back by a compulsion he barely understood himself. Sight start. This deplorable act, necrophilia, was a way for him to relive the kill, to assert his ultimate power over his victims even in death. Sight 32. Sight start. He continued until the smell of decay and the presence of maggots made it impossible. Sight 31. His confessions, delivered years later in a sterile interrogation room, revealed a mind so warped it defied comprehension. He spoke of one victim he had dragged into the river. Nobody was watching. He recounted in a flat, emotionless tone. Sight astart. Pulled off any clothes that she might have had sex with her right there on the spot, put my pants back on, drug her down into the river, and put 1 or 2 rocks on top of her. Sight 29. He developed a bizarre method to try and curb his own necrophiliac urges. Sight start. He began placing rocks inside his victims' bodies. Sight 33, 37. Sight astart. That way there, I wouldn't try to maybe come back the next day and pull her out of the water and have sex with her, he explained to horrified detectives. Sight 38. Sight astart. It was a repellent form of self-control, a barrier he created to stop himself from going back, not out of remorse, but because it was too much effort to retrieve the body from the water site. 39, 44. He even claimed it was a way to stop himself from needing to kill again so soon. Sight start. I would have the rock in there so I wouldn't have to go up and kill another woman. Sight 42. It was a chillingly pragmatic solution to a problem of pure evil. He didn't care about their faces. Sight start. In fact, he actively avoided looking at them after they were dead. Sight 130. Sight start. It was a way to maintain the illusion that they weren't real people, a technique to dehumanize them and make the act of killing easier. Sight 131, 132. Sight start. She could have had a mustache. I probably wouldn't have known, he once said, his memory for their identities conveniently selective. Sight 129, 134. Sight start. He viewed his victims as utterly insignificant. The only thing that mattered was fulfilling his own dark desires. Sight 136, 137. Chapter 3. The Ghost Evolves. The first 5 were found too quickly. The police swarmed the Green River, its name now synonymous with murder. The killer, for all his depravity, was not stupid. Sight start. He was learning, adapting. Sight 118. He realized his chosen dumping ground had become a liability. He saw the news reports, the police tape, The grim-faced detectives combing the riverbanks. Sight, start. He knew he had to change his methods. Sight, 53. Sight, start. Cynthia Hines was the last victim he discarded in the Green River. Sight, 48. Sight A start. After her, he went back to dry land, looking for more effective, more discreet places to hide the evidence of his atrocities. Sight, 54. 56. The very next month, the body of Giselle Lovern was found. Sight O start. She was 17, exceptionally intelligent and on the verge of escaping the life on the streets. Sight, 49. 50. She had a plan. Sight start. 1 more week. Just enough money to fund her trip home to California, and she would be gone forever. Sight, 51. 52. She was found far from the river, a clear signal that the killer had changed his strategy. His new method worked. He became a ghost. Sight start. Between September of 1982 and May of 1983, the police found no one. Sight, 57. For the detectives on the newly formed Green River Task Force, it was a period of agonizing frustration. They knew he was still out there. The disappearances continued, but the bodies had vanished. Sight Austat. In his own twisted mind, the killer saw this as a success. Sight, 57. He was effectively hiding his crimes. Sight Austat. The question that haunted the investigation was simple and maddening. Where was he putting them? Sight, 59. 60. Sight Austat. By the end of 1982, it's estimated that around 15 murders had occurred, though only a fraction of the victims' remains had been located. Sight, 61. The killer was working at a furious pace, his rampage escalating. Para Sight Dergstad. The streets were filled with fear, and the police were demoralized, always one step behind a shadow. Sight, 84. 87. Sight Start. One of his youngest victims during this period was Colleen Brockman. Sight, 62. Sight at start. She was only 15 when she vanished on Christmas Eve of 1982. Sight way 63. Her story was heartbreakingly familiar. Sight or start. She had told a friend her home life was miserable and she had run away before, but she always came back. Sight, 64. 65. This time, she wouldn't. Sight, start. On a cold Christmas Eve in Seattle, she climbed into a truck, believing she was just earning some much-needed money. Sight, 66. Sight, start. She had no idea she had only minutes to live. Sight, 67. Later, the killer would recall the encounter with the same chilling detachment he used for all of them. Sight, died start. He described the sexual act, the moment he choked her, and how she didn't fight much. Sight, 68. 73. Sight and start. He described her as young, with light-colored hair and the fluffiness of baby fat on her cheeks. Sight, 80. 81. Colleen's remains weren't found for 18 long months. When they finally were, it was a small detail that gave her a name and her family a tragic closure. Sight and start. It was the dental braces on her teeth. Sight, 82. 83. As 1983 dawned, the horror only intensified. Sights on start. At its height, as many as 5 women would disappear in a single month. Sight 88. Sight start. By April, the killer's estimated body count had reached 20. Sight 89. And law enforcement, despite their frantic efforts, was absolutely baffled. Sight start. They had no idea who he was or how to stop him. Sight 89. They were hunting a phantom who was always one step ahead, leaving a trail of bodies they couldn't even find. This concludes the initial chapters of the novelization. The narrative would continue to follow the investigation, the consultation with Ted Bundy, the near misses where Gary Ridgway slipped through the fingers of law enforcement, and his eventual capture through DNA technology, all based on the provided source material. Chapter 4. A Devil's Counsel. By 1984, the Green River Task Force was adrift in a sea of frustration. The body count, both known and estimated, continued to climb, yet they were no closer to identifying their phantom. The killer moved through their city like a ghost, leaving behind a trail of grief but no solid clues. The pressure was immense, from the public, from the media, and from the ghosts of the victims themselves. Desperation breeds strange alliances, and in their darkest hour, the detectives made a decision that felt like a deal with the devil. Sight, start. They turned to none other than Ted Bundy for help. Sight 3. The irony was grotesque. Bundy, the charming, intelligent monster who had terrorized a generation, was now being asked to step into the mind of another. From his cell on death row, he likely savored the moment. The police, the very institution that had brought him down, were now seeking his expertise. Sight I start. It was a massive boost to his narcissistic ego, a chance to feel a sense of authority and superiority once more. Sight 103-104. Yet his insights were as chilling as they were brilliant. He's revisiting the scenes, Bundy theorized, his voice calm and analytical, as if discussing a problem in logistics rather than human slaughter. Sight and start. It's a common trait, he explained, for a killer to return to the place where he left his victim. Sight 105. Sight start. The best chance you have of catching this guy red-handed, he advised the detectives, is to get a sight with a fresh body and stick it out. Sight 102. Sight start. He suggested leaving the body, securing the area covertly, and setting up a surveillance network. Sight 99-100. Sight and start. The idea of using a victim's body as bait was morally repugnant, and ultimately, law enforcement was never able to pull it off, but the cold logic behind it was undeniable. Sight 106. He then painted a portrait of the man they were looking for, and it was eerily prescient. Sight start. My gut reaction is these girls are being approached by somebody who really puts them at ease. Bundy mused. Sight 109. He dismissed the idea of an obviously menacing figure. Sight start. No, this man would be unremarkable. Perhaps even dull. Sight 111. He would blend in, appearing as one of their peers, not a predator. Sight start. I'll bet you the last person they would expect to be the killer would be one of their own, he stated with confidence. Sight 114. Sight start. He was describing a wolf in sheep's clothing, a man whose mask of mediocrity was his greatest weapon. Sight 116-219. Sight start. Bundy was fascinated, perhaps even envious, of the mysterious killer who remained at large. Sight 117-120. Sight start. It's kind of fascinating watching some of this unfold, he admitted. But this guy is learning. Sight 118. Sight start. He saw how the killer adapted, changing his dump sites and methods to evade capture. Sight 124. In Bundy's expert opinion, this wasn't random, chaotic violence. This was the work of a student of murder, perfecting his craft. The detectives listened, repulsed yet captivated. They were taking advice on catching a monster from a man who was perhaps the most famous monster of them all. They left the prison with a chillingly accurate profile of their killer, a gift from the devil himself. But they still didn't have a name. Key. Chapter 5. Near Misses. Sight start. The most frustrating element of the Green River case is not the killer's cunning, but the maddening number of times he was practically in the grasp of law enforcement, only to slip through their fingers. Sight 183-210. Sight start. Each near miss was a tragedy, a missed opportunity that was paid for with more lives. Sight 213. Sight start. The first and perhaps most agonizing instance came on the night of April 30th, 1983. 18-year-old Marie Malvar was working the strip when she climbed into a truck site, 94. Her boyfriend, in a desperate attempt to keep her safe, often trailed behind in his own car. Sight adds and start. On this night, he watched the truck she got into pull away, but he lost sight of it at a traffic signal. Sight 95. Frantic, he searched the area and soon located a truck that closely resembled the one Marie had entered. Sight start. It was parked in the driveway of a small, unassuming house. Sight 218-215. That house belonged to a man named Gary Ridgway. Sight start. By the time a detective arrived to investigate the boyfriend's tip, Marie was long gone. Sight 216. Ridgway was likely questioned, but with no body and no direct evidence, there was nothing to hold him on. He slipped away, a ghost in plain sight. Sight and start. Marie's remains would not be located for another 20 years. Sight 217. Another opportunity arose from a story of survival. Sight start. In December of 1984, A woman named Rebecca Garde summoned the courage to walk into a police station. Site 242-243. Site start. She told them of a violent assault that occurred 2 years earlier, in November of 1982. Site 243. Site start. Based on her identification, police interviewed Gary Ridgway in February 1985. Site 246. During the interview, Ridgway was a master of manipulation. Site start. He calmly placed all the blame on Rebecca, concocting a story that she had bitten him during a sex act and he had choked her in reaction. Site 247-254. What would have happened if she had died? A detective asked. Site start. Ridgway's chillingly simple reply, I don't think she would have been seen. Site 257-258. Site start. When later pressed on whether she had actually bitten him, he quietly admitted she had not. Site 259. Site I start. It was his word against hers, and his story, though nonsensical, cast enough doubt. Site 260. The encounter ended with a stunningly naive conclusion from the detective. Site I start. Since Rebecca did not wish to press charges for assault, her main intention was to identify a possible Green River suspect. The officer recommended the case be placed in a closed file. Site 263, 264, 265. Site start. He noted that Ridgway should maybe be looked at a little closer in relation to other assaults, but the immediate threat was dismissed. Site 266. Site start. And just like that, the monster was let go once again. Site 267. Perhaps the most infamous near miss was the polygraph test. Site start. By 1984, Ridgway was high on the list of potential suspects. Site 218. Site start. On May 7th, he agreed to a lie detector test. Site 221. Site start. By this point, he was responsible for the deaths of upwards of 40 women. Site 222. He sat in the chair, sensors attached to his body, and answered their questions. Site start. And somehow he passed Site 223. No deception was detected. How was it possible? Site marker start. Polygraphs are notoriously unreliable, but Ridgway's success was still baffling. Site 224. Years later, he would explain it with unnerving simplicity. He just went in believing he would pass. Site start. I thought for sure I'm going to pass it, he said. Site 228-229. Site start. He was so confident in his ability to get away with murder, so detached from his actions, that his body registered no lie. Site 230-231. He had beaten the machine, and in doing so, had bought himself more time to kill. Chapter 6. The Collector. As if taking their lives wasn't enough, the killer had another sadistic ritual. He was a collector. Site start. He took from his victims the few things they had, stripping them not just of their lives, but of their possessions and their final vestiges of identity. Site 141. Site start. After each murder, he would almost always take the victim's clothing. Site 148. Site start. This wasn't for a practical reason, like hiding evidence, though that was a secondary benefit. Site 145. For him, it was an act of profound hatred. Site start. In his twisted mind, he loathed the women so much that he believed they didn't even deserve their clothes. Site 151. Site start. Leaving them bare was a final act of punishment and degradation. Site 152. Site start. He would later dispose of the clothing casually, often just tossing it from his truck window as he drove. Site 155. Site start. And then there was the jewelry. Site 156. Site start. He took necklaces, rings, and earrings from nearly every victim. Site 163. When asked why, he had no deep psychological reason. It was a simple, brutal act of ownership. Site start. It was their possessions, and now it's mine, and that's it, he stated flatly. Site 164. He described the process with a chilling lack of emotion, like removing trinkets from a doll. Site start. He never had trouble getting a ring off, he claimed. Site 166. Site start. It was, in his own words, perhaps his trademark. Site 170. What he did with the jewelry was even more bizarre and revealed the depth of his arrogance. He didn't keep it or sell it. Sight, start. Instead, he would sometimes bring the stolen pieces to his job at the truck manufacturing plant and secretly toss them into the women's restroom. Sight, 170. He imagined a female employee finding a ring or a necklace and keeping it, never knowing its horrific origin. The act thrilled him. Sight, start. It was a secret that only he was in on. A private joke with the world that made him feel powerful and superior. Sight, 171, 172. Sight Hunt start. He didn't care who ended up with the jewelry. He just wanted it to go to someone who was not at harm. Sight 176. This twisted logic, stealing from the dead to anonymously gift to the living, was a perfect window into a mind that operated entirely without empathy or remorse. He was a collector of secrets, of trophies, of last moments. And for years, no one even knew his collection existed. Chak Chan Roa, Jaila Fan Tiep Teo Kua Tio Tuyet. Chapter 7. The Man in the Mask of Mediocrity. Who was the monster? The question haunted the Pacific Northwest for 2 decades. The answer, when it finally came, was as shocking as it was mundane. He was not a shadowy genius or a demonic specter. Sight as start. He was Gary Ridgway, a 52-year-old truck painter from Auburn, Washington. Sight 181. Sight Hunt start. He was a man who balanced a steady job, 3 consecutive marriages, and a child with a secret life of unparalleled slaughter. Sight 203. He was the quiet neighbor, the unremarkable co-worker, the man you wouldn't look at twice in a crowd. Sight was start. He was the wolf in sheep's clothing that Bundy had predicted, and his disguise of mediocrity was perfect. Sight 116, 204. To understand how the monster was made, one had to look back into the dysfunctional crucible of his early life. Sight and start. In retrospect, the warning signs were there, blatant and terrifying. Sight 185. Sight and start. His childhood was marred by a profoundly disturbing relationship with his domineering mother. Sight 187. Sight and start. He would later allege that after episodes of bedwetting that continued into his teens, his mother would wash his genitals. Sight 188, 189. Sight start. This inappropriate intimacy twisted something inside the young boy, leading him to develop a sexual attraction to her, a secret he harbored alongside fantasies of killing her. Sight 190. Sight start. Adding to this toxic mix was the influence of his father, who openly and frequently voiced a deep-seated hatred for prostitutes in front of his family. Sight 191, 192. Sight and start. Gary absorbed this sentiment, letting his father's animosity fester within him until it grew into a homicidal rage. Sight 193. Sight Ike start. By his teenage years, the desire to torture and kill had taken root. Sight 194. The violence began small, as it so often does. Sight Elba start. The first known victim was the family cat, an early act of cruelty that demonstrated a profound lack of empathy, a hallmark of psychopathy. Sight 195, 196. From there, he escalated. Sight I start. In a shocking act of violence, he lured a 6-year-old boy into the woods and stabbed him. Sight 198. Sight I start. Miraculously, the child survived. Sight 198. Sight I start. All the while, Gary was a poor student with an IQ estimated to be in the low 80s, a fact that perhaps led others to consistently underestimate him. Sight 199. As an adult, he led a double life with chilling efficiency. Outwardly, he was a functioning member of society. Sight out start. Inwardly, he was a psychopath who did not experience feelings the way others do, but was a master at mimicking them. Sight 205. Sight start. This skill allowed him to manipulate everyone around him, from his wives to the detectives who interviewed him. Sight 206. He fooled them all for years, hiding the most monstrous of secrets behind a boring, forgettable face. Chapter 8. The Long Silence. Sight start. After the frenzy of 1982 and 1983, the pace of the killings slowed considerably. Sight 178. The disappearances didn't stop entirely, but they became less frequent. For the Green River Task Force and the community at large, it was the beginning of a long, cold winter of a case. The headlines faded, the leads dried up, and the killer seemed to have vanished back into the shadows from which he had emerged. The years crawled by. 1985 turned into 1986. The file cabinets of the task force grew heavy with reports, witness statements, and dead ends. The name Green River Killer became a part of local lore, a boogeyman story with a terrifyingly real foundation. Families of the missing were left in a state of suspended agony, with no answers and no justice. Amidst this frustrating quiet, in 1987, a seemingly routine event took place. As part of their ongoing investigation, detectives met with Gary Ridgway yet again. He was still a person of interest, one of many, a familiar name in a vast sea of suspects. Site Astart. During this meeting, they asked him for a saliva sample site, 232. It was a simple, non-invasive procedure. Ridgway, ever the cooperative, unassuming subject, complied. Site Astart. At the time, forensic testing was not yet advanced enough to make the sample a smoking gun site. 232. DNA analysis was in its infancy. Site Instart. The small vial of saliva was labeled and filed away in an evidence locker, joining countless other pieces of biological material preserved from victims and suspects. Site 233. For the detectives, it was just one more piece of a puzzle they couldn't solve. For Ridgway, it was just another encounter with law enforcement that he walked away from, free and clear. Neither side could have possibly understood the significance of that moment. Locked away in that sterile container was the killer's ghost, his genetic signature. It was the key that would one day unlock the entire case. But for now, it sat in the dark, a time bomb of truth, waiting patiently for science to catch up with it. The long silence continued, and the killer kept his secrets. Chapter 9. The Ghost in the Machine. Site Start. Nearly 2 decades had passed since the first body was pulled from the Green River Site, 179. It was now 2001. A new century, a new generation of detectives, and most importantly, new technology. The cold case files of the Green River Killer were reopened, this time to be examined not just by human eyes, but by the power of genetic sequencing. Forensic science had made a quantum leap. Site Start, a technique known as short tandem repeat or STR, could now create a definitive genetic profile from the smallest traces of biological material, Site 268. The evidence that had been so painstakingly preserved for years was brought out of storage. Site Afstart. Among the items tested were the saliva sample given by Gary Ridgway in 1987 and samples obtained from several of the victims' Site 233, 268. In the sterile quiet of a crime lab, scientists went to work. The process was methodical, precise, and devoid of emotion, but the results it produced would send a shockwave through the entire state of Washington. A match. Site Start. The DNA from Ridgway's saliva was a perfect match to the DNA found on 4 of the victims. Site 268. The moment the detectives received the news was one of stunned disbelief, followed by overwhelming elation. After 20 years of dead ends, false leads, and agonizing frustration, the ghost finally had a name. The phantom who had haunted their community for so long was not a specter, but a 52-year-old truck painter who lived just miles away. The man who had passed a polygraph, who had been interviewed multiple times, who had hidden in plain sight, was their killer. The arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. Gary Ridgway was taken into custody. His long reign of terror brought to an end not by a dramatic chase or a shootout, but by the cold, irrefutable evidence of a ghost in the machine. As the news broke, a collective gasp was heard across the Pacific Northwest. The mask of mediocrity was finally torn away, revealing the face of the most prolific serial killer in American history. The long silence was finally broken by the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. Chak Chan Roy, Jaila Fan Ket Kwa Kau Chuyen. Setrin. Chapter 10. The Coward's Bargain. The monster once captured was revealed to be nothing more than a soft-spoken, unremarkable man. Site Start gone was the phantom who haunted the highways and riverbanks. In his place sat Gary Ridgway in an interrogation room, a coward seeking to save his own life. Site 209. The detectives who had hunted him for years finally had their ghost cornered, and he was ready to talk, but it would be on his terms. He struck a deal. Side start. In exchange for escaping the death penalty, the very fate he had mercilessly dealt to so many, he would confess. Site 209. He would dredge up the horrors from his memory, lead investigators to the skeletal remains of women they had never found, and help them close the books on dozens of cold cases. It was the ultimate bargain of a coward, a man who saw his own life as infinitely precious while viewing the lives of his victims as completely disposable. Side start. Over the course of many interviews, the secrets of 2 decades finally spilled out. Site 138. But his memory was a strange and frustrating thing. A side start. He had a chilling ability to recall minute, insignificant details. The specific junk in the back of his truck, the turn of a road, but the faces of the women he murdered were blanks. Site 134, 130. Side start. I can't remember the faces because after I killed them, I couldn't look at them anymore. He admitted. Site 130. It was the final proof of his complete dehumanization of them. They were not people to him, but a collection of moments and objects. He provided answers to questions that had long puzzled investigators. Why didn't he return to the crime scenes as so many killers do? It wasn't out of fear or remorse. It was cold, calculated self-preservation. Site S start. I've heard sometimes they film people come in and film everybody, because guys like to come back to see where they kill people. He explained. At Site 140. He knew the police tactics and simply stayed away, foiling their attempts to catch him in the act of remembrance. For the detectives, each confession was a victory and a fresh wave of horror. They were finally getting answers, but those answers only underscored the sheer scale and coldness of his evil. They listened as he spoke of murder in a flat, emotionless tone, the monster's mask now fully removed to reveal nothing but a hollow, selfish void. Epilogue. Echoes in the silence. In December of 2003, Gary Ridgway stood in a courtroom to face the consequences of his actions. Site first start. The man who had evaded justice for so long was sentenced to 48 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for each of the murders he had confessed to at the time. Site 269. Site has start. In 2011, yet another life sentence was added to the tally when he pleaded guilty to the 1982 murder of Rebecca Marrero. Site 270. The final count of his victims may never be truly known. Site start. The official number of lives he took is staggering, but the projected toll is almost incomprehensible. Somewhere between 80 to 90 teenage girls and women fell prey to his diabolical rampage. Site 271. Site start. The number cements his place in history as one of the most prolific and ruthless serial killers the United States has ever known. Site 272. Today, Gary Ridgway sits in a jail cell, where he will remain until his death. The spree is over. The killer is caught. But the story does not end there. To this day, sets of unidentified remains lie in morgues, their names unknown. Site set start. To this day, there are families whose questions have never been answered, who still wait for a call that may never come. Site 273. The Green River may once again flow peacefully through the lush landscapes of Washington, but for those who remember the summer of 1982 and the years of fear that followed, its name will forever be a whisper of the horrors that took place on its banks. The killer is gone, but the echoes of his victims remain, a permanent and tragic scar on the heart of the Pacific Northwest. Of course, I will rewrite this story once more. This version will be crafted with a focus on providing greater detail and a more profound emotional depth, centering the narrative on the human tragedy of the victims and the enduring impact of these events. Please understand that generating a single response of 20,000 words is not feasible. However, I will provide a substantial, multi-chapter beginning to this new, more moving and detailed narrative. Poisabe. Echoes by the Green River. Prologue. The Girl Who Ran. Rain in the Pacific Northwest has a soul. It is a presence, a constant companion that whispers against window panes and paints the world in 1,000 shades of gray. On that evening, it was a cold and unforgiving spirit, a torrent that beat down on the city, intent on washing away all warmth, all hope. For a young woman huddled at a bus stop, it was a torment. The day had been long, etched with the familiar fatigue of labor, and the simple desire to be home, to be dry, had become an all-consuming ache. The bus, a vessel of salvation, was late. Each minute that dripped by felt like an eternity. She watched the headlights of cars carve fleeting golden paths through the gloom, their taillights smearing into crimson ribbons on the slick asphalt. A dangerous idea, a seed of desperation planted by the cold, began to sprout in her mind. It was the siren song of a quick ride home, a gamble against the unknown. She could try to hitch a ride. Every warning her mother had ever given her, every cautionary tale she had ever heard, screamed in her mind. But the rain was relentless, and her resolve was worn to a thread. She took a deep breath, stepped away from the meager shelter, and walked to the edge of the curb, a solitary silhouette against the weeping city. A truck slowed, its engine a low growl that seemed to rumble through the soles of her wet shoes. The window descended, and a face emerged from the shadows, unremarkable, plain, devoid of any discernible threat. He offered her a lift. In that moment of decision, the promise of warmth and a swift journey home won out over the faint, nagging voice of caution. The truck door swung open, an invitation out of the deluge. As she climbed inside, a strange stale odor, a mix of old coffee and something vaguely metallic, pricked at her senses. Sight, start. They settled on a price for the ride and for the transaction that would follow, a common arrangement in the shadows of the city side. 5. The shift was imperceptible at first, a subtle cooling in his tone, a new tension in the air. Then came the grip on her arm, a hold that was not comforting but proprietary, cold and strong as steel. The casual emptiness in his eyes sharpened into something predatory. Panic, white-hot and absolute, erupted in her chest. This was not a transaction, it was a trap. What followed was a chaotic explosion of instinct. A scream tore from her throat, swallowed by the drumming of the rain and the confines of the truck's cab. She fought with the desperate feral strength of a cornered animal. She kicked, she clawed, she bit. It was a battle not for dignity, but for breath, for life itself. And then, a miracle. A brief lapse in his control, a moment of leverage. The door latch. She threw her entire body against the door, and it flew open, spilling her out into the cold, harsh embrace of the night. The asphalt scraped her skin raw, a searing pain that was instantly eclipsed by the adrenaline of her escape. She didn't look back. To look back was to risk seeing the monster, to risk freezing in terror. She scrambled to her feet and ran. She ran with fire in her lungs and tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. She ran toward the distant city lights, each one a promise of safety. She ran until the sound of the truck's engine was gone, until she was just another soul fleeing the darkness. She was the girl who ran, the one who survived. She would carry the scars of that night forever, but she would live. She could never know then the profound significance of her escape. She was the first note in a long, sorrowful song, the prologue to a story of unimaginable loss. She was the echo of the countless girls who would not be so lucky, the ones who would climb into that same truck and never climb out again. Chapter 1. Wendy's Song. 16 is an age of whispered secrets and boundless horizons. It is the age of driver's permits and first loves, of dog-eared notebooks filled with song lyrics and dreams that feel as real and solid as the pavement under your feet. It is an age of becoming, a fragile, beautiful moment suspended between the child you were and the adult you will be. Sight start. For Wendy Cofield, 16 was all she would ever be. Sight. 16. The future, a vast and shimmering ocean of possibility, had been stolen from her, leaving only a cold, silent stillness in the green water. Sight dead start. She disappeared a week before she was found, vanishing into the city's indifferent maw sight. 16. One can only imagine that week for her family, a period of mounting dread, of frantic phone calls, of prayers whispered into the darkness. A week of holding onto the hope that she had just run off, that she would walk back through the door at any moment with a sheepish grin, as teenagers sometimes do. It was a hope that would be brutally extinguished. Sight start. On July 15th, 1982, two boys sought refuge from the summer heat along the idyllic banks of the Green River. Sight 15. It was a place of vibrant life, where sunlight dappled through the leaves of ancient trees and the water chuckled over smooth stones. They were just boys, their heads full of summer adventures, their laughter echoing in the tranquil air. And then one of them saw it, a pale form, half hidden by the gentle current, snagged on a submerged branch. curiosity turned to confusion, then to dawning horror. It was not a mannequin. It was not an animal. It was a girl. Side start. When the authorities pulled Wendy Cofield from the river, they found that she had been strangled with an item of her own clothing. Site 17. It was an act of intimate personal violence, a final suffocating betrayal. Site I start. Her death was reported as a tragedy, a terrible but singular event in the life of the city site. 21. No one could have known that it was not an end, but a beginning. It was the first verse of a killer's gruesome ballad, a song that would soon swell into a chorus of the dead. Wendy was the first girl the river took, the first name in a list that would grow to an unbearable length. Chapter 2. A Litany of the Lost. After Wendy, the river began to give up more of its grim secrets. The summer of 1982, once full of promise, curdled into a season of fear. The discoveries came with a sickening rhythm, each one a fresh hammer blow to the community's sense of safety. Site at start. First came Deborah Bonner, just 23 years old. Site 23. Her life, with all its complexities, joys, and sorrows, was reduced to a name on a police report and a body pulled from the water. What dreams did she have? What loves did she cherish? The river held no answers. Then the horror escalated. Site start. Within a single month, 3 more were found, all in the same terrible desecrated stretch of the riverbank. Site 24. Site start. The beautiful area that had once provided a heavenly ambience had quickly transformed into hell on earth. Site 25. Site start. Marsha Chapman, 31. Site 24. A woman, not a girl, perhaps with a past etched on her face, but still a future to hope for. A future that was now gone. Site start. Cynthia Hines, 17. Site 24. A contemporary of Wendy's, another life barely begun. Perhaps they had even known each other, shared a word on the street, unaware of the shared monstrous fate that awaited them. Site start. And Opal Mills, just 16 years old. Site 24. A child. Like Wendy, she stood on the very precipice of life, only to be thrown into the abyss. Site R start. 5 victims in a matter of weeks. Site 10. 5 families plunged into a nightmare from which they would never awaken. The street workers, the girls and women of the night, now lived in a state of quiet terror. Site start. They were the forgotten ones, trapped in a dangerous life. Site 8. And now they were being hunted. Site start. The phantom who stalked them saw them only as objects for his pleasure, easily dispensable and utterly insignificant. Site 13-136. Every set of headlights that slowed, every truck door that opened, held the potential for annihilation. The Pacific Avenue South Strip, a place of harsh survival, had become a hunting ground. A litany of the lost was being written in the waters of the Green River, and no one knew when the list would end. The narrative would continue in this vein, focusing on the individual stories of Giselle Lovern, Colleen Brockman, Marie Malvar, and others, weaving their personal tragedies into the larger tapestry of the investigation and the 2-decade-long search for justice. Certainly, here is the continuation of the story, Echoes by the Green River, maintaining the focus on the detailed and emotional lives of those affected. Purple. Chapter 3. A Future Denied. 17 is the age of escape. It is the year of dreaming of highways that stretch into a golden sunset, of mapping out a new life far from the mistakes and sorrows of the old one. For Giselle Lovern, 17 was the year she was going to break free. Site start. She was not just another face on the street, she was exceptionally intelligent, with a mind that saw beyond the gritty confines of her current reality. Site 50. The life she was living was a temporary purgatory, a means to a magnificent end. Site start. That end was a bus ticket home to California. Site 52. She had a plan, meticulous and filled with hope. 1 more week. Site start. That's all she needed. Site 51. 7 more days of navigating the dangerous currents of the Strip, of hardening her heart against the cold transactions, of keeping the bright, warm image of the California sun in her mind. She could almost feel its heat on her skin, a stark contrast to the damp, oppressive chill of the Pacific Northwest. She likely counted the days, maybe even the hours, each one a small victory bringing her closer to her goal. Site start. She just needed enough money to fund the trip, to buy her passage back to a life she deserved. Site 52. One can imagine her in those final days, her intelligence a shield against the despair of her surroundings. Perhaps she carried a book with her, its pages a portal to another world. Perhaps she wrote letters home that she never sent, filled with promises of her imminent return. Site start. She was on her way out, a soul pulling itself from the quicksand, her fingertips brushing against the solid ground of a new beginning. Site 50. But the hunter who stalked the Seattle streets was not interested in her mind, her plans, or her dreams of a California sunrise. He saw only an opportunity. Site A start. Giselle Lovern became his sixth known victim, her body found on September 25, 1982. Site 49. She was not found in the river. Site A start. The killer was evolving, learning, finding better ways to conceal his atrocities. Site 56. He had moved to dry land, and in doing so, he had intercepted a girl on the verge of her own escape. He didn't just take her life, he stole a future that she had painstakingly planned and was only days away from claiming. The California sun would have to wait forever. Chapter 4. A Christmas Without Colleen. Christmas Eve should be a night of magic, of soft lights twinkling against a velvet sky, of families gathered in warmth and love. It should be a night of hopeful anticipation. But on Christmas Eve of 1982, a cold and profound darkness fell over one family in North Seattle. Site start. Their 15-year-old daughter, Colleen Brockman, was gone. Site 62-63. Colleen's life was not an easy one. Site start. She had confided in a friend that her home, which she shared with her father and brother, was miserable. Site 64. Like many teenagers in pain, she had run away before, brief flights from a reality that had become unbearable. Site start. But she had always returned. Site 65. Her previous disappearances had created a pattern, a fragile thread of reassurance that her family now clung to with desperate hope. She would be back. She always came back. Site start, but this time was different. Site 66. This time she had climbed into a truck with a man who saw her not as a troubled child in need of help, but as an object for his cold, brutal desires. On a night when the world was singing carols of peace and goodwill, Colleen was murdered. Site start. The killer would later recount the act with a chilling detachment, describing how he choked her, how she didn't fight too much, as if her struggle for life was a minor inconvenience. Site 73. For 18 long months, Colleen's family lived in the agonizing limbo of the unknown. Every phone call, every knock on the door could have been her. The Christmas tree of 1982 was likely put away with a heavy heart. The Christmas of 1983 would have been an exercise in hollow grief. They waited for a girl who would never return. When her remains were finally located, the detail that confirmed her identity was the most poignant symbol of her stolen youth. Site start. It was the braces on her teeth. Site 83. That simple adolescent metalwork, a promise of a future smile that would never be, was the final heartbreaking evidence of who she was. The child who had run away from a miserable home had found a fate infinitely worse, her life cut short on a night meant to be filled with light. Chapter 5. The Hunter's Shadow. As the body count climbed, a palpable sense of desperation descended upon the law enforcement agencies of King County. They were not just investigating murders, they were fighting a war against a phantom. Site start. The horrifying spree raged on, and the detectives found the level of frustration hard to bear as they raced to identify an assailant who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Site 86. Site start. They were demoralized each time another set of remains was located, another family's worst fears realized. Site 87. Site start. By April of 1983, with the estimated death toll already at 20, they were, in their own words, absolutely baffled. Site 89. This profound desperation led them to an unthinkable choice. To catch the monster that was terrorizing their city, they decided to consult another one. Site start. They turned to Ted Bundy. Site 3. The image is surreal, a scene from a dark fable. Seasoned detectives, haunted by the faces of dead girls, sitting across from a charismatic sociopath on death row, asking for his professional opinion. Bundy, his ego likely immense, held court. He spoke with the chilling authority of an expert in his field, analyzing the Green River killer's work with a connoisseur's eye. Sight saw start. He theorized that the killer would return to his dump sites, a common trait among his kind, and he suggested a grim plan to use a victim's body as bait. Sight 98-102. But his most unnerving contribution was his profile of the man they sought. He was not, Bundy insisted, a monster who looked like one. Sight start. I'll bet you the last person they would expect to be the killer would be one of their own peers, he told them. Sight 114. Sight start. He described a man who could put his victims at ease, someone with an unassuming appearance, boring, dull, normal. Sight 109-111. The detectives left that prison with a portrait of their killer that was both terrifying and infuriating. Their phantom was not a creature of the night, but a man who lived in the light. Sight start. A wolf in sheep's clothing. Sight 116. The hunter's shadow could be cast by any man, standing anywhere. The search felt more hopeless than ever. They had a profile from the devil himself, but they were no closer to a name. Of course. Here is the continuation of the narrative. Echoes by the Green River. Chapter 6. The Ghost in the Driveway. For every victim whose story ended in tragedy, there are countless others who carry the weight of that loss. Mothers, fathers, siblings, friends, and lovers. Theirs is a different kind of suffering, a wound that never truly heals, an agonizing lifelong search for answers that may never come. For the boyfriend of 18-year-old Marie Malvar, that agony began on the night of April 30th, 1983. He was her protector, a guardian angel in a beat-up car, a familiar presence trailing her through the dangerous nights on the strip. It was a desperate, imperfect system, but it was born of love and fear. On this night, he watched as Marie climbed into a client's truck, just as she had done countless times before. He followed, keeping a safe distance, his headlights a silent promise that she was not alone. But at a traffic signal, the promise was broken. The truck slipped through the light and he was caught by the red. It was a separation of only a few seconds, but it was enough. He lost her. Panic clawed at him. He drove frantically through the grid of streets, his heart pounding a rhythm of pure dread. He searched for the truck, his mind replaying its make and model, any distinguishing features. And then, a flicker of hope in the darkness. Parked in the driveway of a small, nondescript house was a truck that looked hauntingly familiar. It had to be the one. He called the police, his voice likely shaking with a mixture of terror and relief. A detective arrived, but by then, the driveway was just a driveway, and the house was just a house. Sight start. Marie was gone. Sight 216. The man who lived there, Gary Ridgway, was likely questioned, his face a mask of innocence, his words smooth and plausible. There was no evidence, no sign of a struggle, no Marie. There was nothing to hold him on. For 20 years, Marie Malvar was simply gone. For 20 years, her boyfriend and her family lived in a torturous limbo. They were haunted by the image of that truck, of that house, a place where all their questions converged and then dissolved into thin air. They had been so close. They had found the monster's lair, had stood on his doorstep, but the ghost had slipped through their fingers, taking Marie with him. The knowledge that he was there, living his life while Marie was gone, was a special kind of hell, a torment reserved for those who are left behind. Polbo, Chapter 7. A Voice in the Dark. It takes a rare and profound kind of courage to survive a monster. It takes something more to then willingly walk back into the darkness to identify him. 2 years after she had fought for her life and escaped the clutches of Gary Ridgway, Rebecca Garday found that courage. In December of 1984, she walked into a police station, her voice a beacon of truth in a case shrouded in darkness. She told her story, a harrowing account of an assault that had occurred in November of 1982. Based on her testimony, investigators once again found themselves face to face with Gary Ridgway in February of 1985. He sat across from them, not as a panicked killer, but as a calm, rational man who felt he had been wronged. He was a masterful manipulator. With a quiet and convincing tone, he spun a tale of self-defense, placing all the blame on Rebecca. Sight Astart, he claimed she had bitten him, and he had only choked her in a momentary reactive panic. Sight 247, 254. It was a lie, a complete fabrication he would admit to years later. But in that room, it was his word against hers. His performance was flawless. He presented himself as the victim, a man who had been subjected to a violent act and had simply defended himself. The detectives were left with a frustrating stalemate. Sight Astad, Rebecca, having achieved her primary goal of identifying a man she believed was the Green River Killer, did not wish to press charges for the assault itself. Sight 264. Her intention was not to prosecute a single crime, but to stop a war. The investigating officer, seeing no path forward, made a fateful decision. Sight Start. He recommended the case be placed in a closed file. Sight 2063. Sight Start. In his final report, he added a chillingly prophetic note, stating that perhaps Gary Ridgway should maybe be looked at a little closer. Sight 266. And just like that, the door slammed shut. Rebecca Gardett's brave voice, a voice that could have ended the slaughter, was effectively silenced by the killer's cunning and a system that failed to see the monster behind the mask of mediocrity. He walked out of that police station a free man, leaving Rebecca's truth to be filed away in the dark while he returned to the hunt. Chapter 8. The Heartbeat of a Liar. On May 7, 1984, Gary Ridgway sat in a sterile room, a web of wires connecting him to a polygraph machine. Sight Start. By this date, he had murdered more than 40 women. Sight 222. Their last moments, their final terrified breaths, were secrets locked away behind his calm, unassuming eyes. The machine, a marvel of science, was designed to find those secrets. Its needles were supposed to dance and tremble at the slightest deception, to detect the physiological storm that erupts within a person when they lie. The test began. Questions were asked, simple and direct, each one a probe aimed at the heart of his darkness. The detectives watched, waiting for the telltale spike, the jump of a needle that would betray the monster. But it never came. The pens traced a steady, even line. His heart beat with a placid rhythm. His breathing was calm. His skin registered no panic. According to the machine, he was telling the truth. Sight Start. No deception was detected. Sight 223. How could a man responsible for so much death, a man living a lie of such epic proportions, defeat a machine designed to detect falsehood? The answer is the very definition of psychopathy. He wasn't lying in a way the machine could understand, because